All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Communications That Build Momentum. So this is part one of a two-part series where we're going to take a closer look at how to articulate compelling, motivating stories and how to understand and connect with audiences. So stay tuned for more information at the end of today's presentation for information about part two. I'm going to introduce our presenter here in just a minute, but before we get started, there are, of course, just a few housekeeping items that we need to go over. So first, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, but if you have a question, that doesn't mean you have to stay silent. Feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat to ask questions. We'll monitor those throughout the webinar, and we'll be sure to leave plenty of time to answer everyone's questions during a dedicated Q&A session at the end. Next, live captioning is available for today's webinar, and you can access those captions by clicking on the closed captioning icon and selecting Show Subtitle. If you have audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser, and if that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back in. And also, please keep in mind that because we are presenting from different locations, there may be some variations in bandwidth and internet stability. So if the sound fluctuates or one of us freezes up for a minute, thank you in advance for bearing with us. I promise we will keep on rolling through any little tech things. And finally, we are recording today's webinar, and the recording will be available on the OAC's webinars page at oac.ohio.gov/webinars and on our YouTube channel by early next week. All right, that does it for housekeeping. So now I'd like to welcome today's speaker, Carrie Schmidt. As managing partner of Plenifol LLC, a consultancy to nonprofit organizations, she focuses on the formation of advancement strategies that are tailored for each organization's situation. So Carrie, we are so excited to have you with us today to share your knowledge. Welcome, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm sorry I can't see all your faces. We were just kidding. I was just saying the efficiency of Zoom and of webinars can't be beat, but it's a bummer not to see you. So I'm happy though to be with you. I'm happy to share a few things from our practice that hopefully can help your practice. And hopefully this is fun. So, because communication should be fun. So I think it's worth just starting off with what is communications. Here we are in a practice area that's all about adding clarity around content. And sometimes I think communications, marketing, branding are just as guilty as anyone else of using words with multiple meanings or intentions. So let's just be clear about what we mean by communications. I think the first and most important thing is it's not pushing out information. A lot of times we see communications happen and it has more the feel of, I just have so much to say, so I'm going to just keep saying it, in a really loud voice and pushing it out and pushing it out. And what we want to do is take a step back from that and really think about how do we make communications so that they're effective and productive, or the title of this, building momentum towards goals. So communications really is purposeful in its design. We should have a really clear idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it. It should be tailored for an audience. Ultimately, that's the point. You're not communicating just to say information, you're communicating to talk to someone. Part of that purpose and design should be that it sparks an action. You're looking to accomplish something, and therefore that should be clear in the communication you're making. It should be sustained and consistent, not episodic or occasional. And we're thinking that in terms of an ongoing communications function. And we'll talk about it a lot more. And then it should be measurable, and it should be in service of goals. Ultimately, when we landed on the theme of this webinar as being to build momentum, well, what does that mean? That means that we're constantly, I think of it as sort of going up a ladder, right? You're constantly seeing that one positive communications achievement begets another one, and you're using communications as much as a tool and an accelerator of your organization's goals. So that's really how we think about communications. Why do we communicate? Well, let's just be really clear about that too and not make any assumptions, because we have a lot to accomplish in roles. And I know there's a lot of different types of roles that you're playing, and that we have a lot of different types of organizations that may be hearing this content. But if the one common thread probably all of us have is that when we're communicating, we're trying to get something done. Ultimately, it builds awareness, it creates understanding, it augments our reputation, creates interest, it builds engagement, it builds momentum. So we really think of communications as truly being that powerful tool in the toolbox that we can use to do all the other things your program wants to accomplish. So a little bit about Plenifol. I'm managing partner of Plenifol, and my business partner and I really focus deeply on blending two things, and that's strategic marketing principles with nonprofit development best practices. Much of our work is specifically using marketing, communications, and branding to drive the revenue model. And most often we look at that specifically for fundraising, for development. However, you can take a step back from that and think, okay, revenue model can be broad. That can be memberships, that can be attendance at events. It's about selling tickets. It's about gaining audience for an exhibit. So there's many different ways that you fund that revenue model that of course funds your program, that of course allows you to do more things. We really look at the two in concert because at the end of the day, what these things do, strategic marketing principles, nonprofit development, nonprofit management, it's really simple, right? It's basically that we're all aiming to build productive and mutually beneficial relationships. And relationships are built, one of the ways, through communication. So there we go. That's what brings us together. My preference when attending a webinar is I like things I can really take away and apply and consider, and it's pretty simple to see. And I'm also just a really big fan of top 10 lists. So we approached it that way when we were thinking about what information might be best to share in today, especially in this, in this channel. So we have for you the top 10 ways to design communications that build momentum. And I'll share a couple of stories in this, but what I'd really love, and Katie will help me out with this, is we're going through, if you have a question about how this applies to something you're doing, please ask it. I tried to make sure we were keeping this at a level that is applicable to many different types of organizations and tactics and goals, but happy to explore something specific if you should have a question about it. We'll start at the beginning and we'll start in the heart of it all. And when we think about number one, define a core story and use it consistently. When we went through that list of what can communications accomplish, obviously one of the most important things communication accomplishes is that it builds your reputation and it builds understanding. And you do that by repeating your story, not to a point that's just you say the same words every time, but you want to constantly tell your story, reinforce your story, clarify and exhibit what really makes your organization, your program unique and interesting and differentiated, and of course, its purpose. So when we think about what communications should reflect, they should always reflect three things. They should always reflect the mission, if not say it overtly. They should always reflect the way the organization is serving the mission. And that may vary depending on the topic of the specific communication, but you will want to always be underscoring that it is in service to the mission. And the audience's role in serving the mission. Remember, we're not just pushing information. We're trying to also be aware of, we're also trying to be aware of what they can do, what action we want them to take. So our tip, which will be at the bottom of each one of these pages, reinforce the story in every communication that you tell. So when you're done with the communication, you've created something, an email, a newsletter, a promotion, whatever it may be, ask yourself, has this told or underscored or reflected our core story in some way? Because that is what you want to constantly be reinforced. If you want to think of examples of this, think of what you see oftentimes in commercials or ads that you see digitally. They may be about a specific topic. They might be about a specific product, but really strong brands always find a way to remind you what it is that they are distinctly best at. And we want to see the same from you as well. I'm having a hard time getting all my gadgets to work. Okay. Number 2, communicate like a person, and specifically a person that your audience would really like. So there's a bit of an edge to that. In our next session, we're going to talk a lot about understanding your audience. So that can add a little texture to this one. How do you understand your audience? How do you know what they'd like? But I'm guessing that most of you have at least an intuitive sense of who your audience is, what their personalities are, and what in the world it is that brings you together, right? Like, why are they interested in your organization, in your program, and what it is that you have in common. At the same time, any strong organization, any strong brand has a personality in and of itself. And so it's important to define this. Actually take the time to put it down on paper. Think of it as a tone of voice. Set that tone of voice, stick with that tone of voice. Blend intellectual and emotional traits appropriately. And know when to wear the suit, know where to win the jeans, when to wear the jeans. That's kind of just a flip way of saying, like, understand when you need to be serious, understand when you can have some fun. Every person has both sides of their personality. Every organization can do the same. So, for example, if you're responding to announcing a new policy, a new program, something that perhaps has something that's a bit of heft to it, you know, to strike the right tone with that. If we're talking about something that's celebratory or commemorating something that's important to the organization, perhaps that can have a bit of fun to it. If you know the range of your organization's tone, then you'll know how to stay in that range, and it creates a consistency. So use those personality traits so that there is a look, a feel, and a sound that's very recognizable to your audience. And then they start to feel like they're engaged with an organization they understand, that they have something in connection with. Retailers are excellent at this. And oftentimes we see that starts to create. The other important point of this is that it can, for any organization, it makes sure that your communications are not person dependent. Like one staff person who just has a great tone of voice, if that person should ever unfortunately move on to another organization, you don't want your tone of voice to fly out the door at the same time too. So it's a good idea to have this set for the organization so that if someone new comes into the role, if more people come into the role, whatever the case may be, everyone's really working off the same playbook there. All right, number 3, be personal and targeted, but assume that everyone sees everything. So what do we mean by that? I think one of the best examples of this is to think of a higher education organization. I used to work with a lot of colleges and universities, and if you think of really any college or university, the same person can be one of many, many different audiences. Could be a student, could be a parent of a student, could be an alum, could be a fan, could be an employee, could be a contractor, could be a neighbor in the community, could be, could be just a graduate of one school and a graduate of one college, and those could have their own communication streams. So you can think about how it's very easy for one person to actually be on multiple mailing lists, if we think of it very functionally. And so there's good and bad to that. One, we want to be as targeted and tailored and personalized as we possibly can be. We also want to understand that in the same household, amongst neighbors, they might see, someone else's targeted, tailored, personalized communication. So we want things to always feel like they're coming from the same organization, given core story and personality. But we also want to be able to use those mailing lists, use those audience segments, and use that information, that data, to be able to make specific connections with those audiences. So when our tip for this is when you're creating a communication, start with who before what. Who is this audience? Is this audience season ticket holders? They're loyal ticket holders, they've come every year and seen our performances. Therefore, we should treat them that way. We know who they are. We understand that they've been loyal and we want to honor that. Are these prospects? Well, then we're really trying to bring them in. Now, the core of those communications probably looks identical, but the way we set up those communications would be appropriate to who that audience is. So that's kind of an example of what we mean when we say be targeted, be personal, but don't change personalities just based on who the audience is. Know when to be predictable and when to shake it up. What do we mean by that? So the majority of communications should be familiar and anticipated. All of us, I'm sure, have the same experience where our inboxes get wildly full of various emails. And so you sit down at the end of the day and you have a lot to go through if you haven't been checking out through the day, right? And that's just email. That doesn't even count for all the other channels that you could be communicating with. So when you have an organization, as an audience member, when you have an organization that you care about, it's helpful when there are things that signal that this is something you want to check out, that stands apart from the crowd. And so that can be, oh, good, I expected to hear from them this month. I'm not surprised to be hearing from them again. I want to use my visual and verbal cues to know who it is and what it is they're communicating about in this topic. And that just lets that familiarity and that anticipation start to create an opportunity for your audiences to really be able to stay in that rhythm with you. They know to check out that monthly communication because that's when they get it. They know to check out that annual report when you send it. They know to send out the pre-season information before it comes to them. Those kinds of steady cadences help them help things be recognizable and resonate. Having said that, just like any good 80-20 rule, once in a while you need to shake things up, right? We can't let anyone just kind of lull into habit. So at the same time, when you have something different to announce, exciting to preview, that's when you can really break some of these rules and, and like we say, shake it up a little bit. Another great example of this is from the development side of the equation. When we think of fundraising, we think of annual fund, for example. We want to be raising money year round, not just on Giving Tuesday. Right? So we want to make sure we're sending communications year round. But if we did that, we want to have a blend of really steady opportunities, indirect and direct asks throughout the year that create moments for donors to consider a gift. And then we like to splash in there really targeted, really specific pushes. So there's sort of these moments of volume that go up that can capture those prospective or current donors' attention and say, oh yeah, okay, it seems like this is sort of equivalent to when like a retailer has a sale and you pay attention. It's like, oh, well, I've wanted those shoes a long time. I should probably just go ahead and buy those shoes now. It's kind of the same thing with making a gift. It's like, oh, I've been meaning to give a gift. Looks like they're having a spring campaign, a summer focus, whatever the case may be. I should go ahead and make my gift. Really what you're doing is just prompting a behavior. The same idea can be applicable for any other initiative that you're taking to promote an action. That's where you sort of have those moments where you break the cadence. So think about that. We'll talk about this one in a few more slides when we talk about planning. Or actually, right this moment, sorry. So 5, a clear plan creates focus and increases efficiency. So plan the work, work the plan. It's just, I laugh about it all the time. It's like one thing we have absolutely learned over the last few years is that it's easier to pivot a plan than to create one on the fly, right? So you never want to be in a situation where you're not sure what's supposed to happen next. Now, at the same time, if you need to change something, whether it's like the world shuts down like we saw in 2020, or whether it's, a small change that has occurred, like a change of date or something of that nature, it's easier to flip things around, but you want to be able to have one big plan that you're constantly working. And there's a few reasons for that. One, it enables you to work much more productively. If you know what's coming, you can work in advance. You can distribute the workload. You can think about how that fits in with other responsibilities the staff has to get things done. 2, the big picture makes it easier to plan each tactic more effectively. So if we understand comprehensively where we want to take our audiences over the course of a year, then we can think about how each moment within the year needs to be laddering up to that. If we have, again, if I think of this in sort of the exhibit world, when we know what big exhibits will happen periodically through the year, or what special events might happen periodically through the year, then we can think about what needs to happen before and after that gives each of those the best possible resonance with our audience. And then the results, and this all results in a much more cohesive audience experience. So given what we said before, we know our audiences, even those that are big fans, can get lost in communications when there's just a lot in their inboxes. So if we know what we're trying to do with them and we're previewing things and our communications are clear and focused and have an intention to them, it's much more likely they're going to follow the thread of what we're trying to tell them. So our recommendation on this is to maintain a rolling 12-month high-level communications plan. And this can be one page, have your 12 months, kind of have sketched out what you're communicating and why across those 12 months. And then at any given, or then for 3 months at a time, that's where you want to have your detail pretty well locked in. That can include your content plan, what you're doing in social channels, what you're doing in digital channels. If you're doing any print, what that would be, that's where you want to have your detail at 3 months. And again, rolling. So you always are looking ahead 3 months in detail. You're always looking ahead 12 months at a time and plan. Every communication has a goal, or it's not worth doing. And we feel really, really, really strongly about this. At Plenifol, we ask ourselves and our clients all the time, what's the goal? What's the goal? What's the point of doing this? We always want to start with the goal in mind. If we know what we're trying to accomplish, we can know what we need to do. So good examples of this can be anniversaries. If you're working on the opportunity to celebrate a 5th anniversary, a 10th anniversary, a 15th anniversary, those are good moments to capture, be it for giving, be it for engagement, be it for attendance. Those can be nice opportunities to create just a little bit of a special feel. But anniversaries in and of themselves are really most important to inside the organization than really outside the organization. So we use this one as an example quite often because a really happy birthday is a great thing, but does it actually drive you towards your organization's goals? It can, but that requires some planning, right? We want to think about, okay, how are we using the opportunity of this anniversary to achieve one of our organizational goals? And if one of our organizational goals is we want more prospects in our pipeline. We want more prospective audiences who are ticket holders or who are event attendees or who are funders and supporters. Then that means we need to acquire more names. We need to acquire more audiences. Well, what can we do as part of our anniversary celebration that has our core audience actually introduce us to new audiences or helps us reach new audiences? That's thinking of your anniversary with a goal in mind. Your other goal may be we want to just really steward those who've been with us on the ride. So there's not necessarily a fundraising goal to it, but there's a very important stewardship and cultivation goal. Well, that doesn't mean you need to have rent out the gym and do a balloon drop. That means you just need to really send something very targeted to those who you're most trying to celebrate as part of your anniversary. 2 different goals. So the point being here is just if you create the habit of sitting down and thinking to yourselves, what is the goal of this? What is the goal of that? You'll find that just doing that starts to create much more effective communications that are building that momentum. This, of course, is a drill down from the plan. The plan should be a big look at what all of the goals are that you're trying to accomplish. Create strong content and leverage it fully. I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm running a communications plan, coming up with the big picture of what it is that I hope to accomplish comes to me pretty quickly. And then when I really sit down and start to create the content, for me, that's harder. That's just me. But the truth is the content has to be strong. You need a good story. You need great images. You want compelling insights. These are all the things that are really going to make then that tactically well executed communication actually land and have impact with your audiences. So it's worth the time that you invest, the effort you invest to create good, strong content. But we all know it takes time and it takes effort to create good and strong content. So our tip or advice in this is really two things. One, as we indicate in the title here, leverage it fully. What we mean by that is you can tell it and use it multiple times. I've never really statistically proven this, but I just kind of say that one good piece of content should be able to be used 8 different ways. And what I mean by that is it can be in an email, it can be in a letter, it could be featured in your social. Maybe it's broken down into 5 little micro bits and put into your social feeds. It might be resurfaced as a quarterly wrap up. It might be a preview and on a preview to an event, at the event and after the event. All that saying is one really good piece of content you should get some mileage out of it. This third bullet here, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I heard this said in a webinar I attended probably about 5 months ago, and I cannot find the name of the individual who said it. So whoever this brilliant consultant was who said this quote, I apologize, I don't know your name, but I'm giving you full attribution. Never have data without stories, never have stories without data. And I think that's just, I wrote it down immediately and I actually kind of stuck it up on my wall because I'm like, that's a perfect reminder that really the two work great together. One really interesting data point with a story wrapped around it is very likely to really stick with an audience. So I pass that on to you as well. Our application tip here, have a monthly content planning conversation. One of the organizations we've worked with has a very small staff. We all can relate to that. Each staff member wears a number of different hats. They run fast, they work hard. They're each, kind of seeing and doing different things every day, every week. And we just implemented the practice that once a month at the top of the month, they get together and they talk about what they've seen in their organization, people they've heard from, work they've done, how the audience, responded to it, and what might be really interesting stories then to share with their audiences, especially again, we think of things often in a development lens, especially with their donor audience, but certainly with any of their target audiences. And it's been fantastic because now it's no longer, yes, they have one person who's ultimately responsible for the communications, but they're all thinking with a content lens of, wow, that's a great story. We should put that, on our Facebook page, or like, that's a really good story we should tell in our annual report. They all kind of have that lens and they're all sourcing these great pieces of content together. So that might be something worth trying, whether it's all of you, a couple of you. It's just, can't beat more minds and eyes coming to a task. Okay, number 8, start a conversation by opening lines of communication. So we started this whole conversation today with the statement that communications are not just pushing out information. Well, we've talked about all the ways to sort of make communications more interesting, more focused, more tactical. But let's also remember that really it should be a conversation, especially now we almost have an expectation of it as audience members, that it can be a conversation. So think of it as the push and the pull. We want to pull feedback. We want to pull a response. There's lots we can ask for through our communications that start to create real conversations or the sense of real conversations for those who are just observing. Invite feedback. I always think that especially for a digital communication, any communication can say, what do you think? Email us, or it can ask very specifically, of the stories we've shared to you, with you today? What most resonates? Or even almost a poll. Are you likely to attend this exhibit? Are you likely to attend this show? We'd love to hear from you. What interests you? Ask for those kinds of, ask for insights or perspectives or opinions or interests. See what you get. I mean, these aren't hard-hitting marketing survey tactics that I'm saying here, but it's just making sure that you're being clear to your audiences that you're interested in what they think about something. Or post an event. Of course, we all, dutifully send our post-event surveys. But if it's been an opening night, if it's been, a small gathering sort of to learn about a topic, if you send 3 questions afterwards, sometimes that gets better response than, to send the formal poll. So try both and see what works with your audiences. And then this is important, be authentic and respectful with what you receive back. In every way, I guess I mean that. So, in the sense that first off, if someone's taking the time, please say thank you to them if they've responded to you and given you their insights, perspectives, opinions, and interests. And beyond that, you don't want to attribute anything to them without their permission. But at the same time, use it if they've given it to you. What you don't want to happen is that you have, a dummy email inbox that all the feedback goes to that no one ever looks at. And then unfortunately, someone finally opens it up 8 months later, and there was something really valuable in there or really important in there that's been overlooked. So at minimum, manage it. If you ask, look at it. And then secondly, think of all the ways you can use that and continue a feedback loop. One time we had the opportunity, it was after an event, and we did exactly what I just said. We did not send the poll or the survey. We simply asked 3 questions. What was the best moment? What do you wish had happened? What would you like to see next time? And it was surprising to us how many people took the time to respond to that rather than, to respond to, to what would be maybe a more formal survey. And it was hugely valuable. So try it out. Use a few tools and tactics really, really well. One thing that we are not short of today are ways to communicate. There's so many ways we can communicate, so many channels, so many platforms, so many tools, so many techniques or tactics, and we're not short of these opportunities. But it can become complicated very quickly. Assuming that everyone, no matter the size of the organization, eventually has a capacity and resource restraint, whether you're a party of 1 or you have a team of 20, still there's a boundary somewhere. So within that boundary, it's really best to be excellent at a few things and focus on them. And so what we'd rather see is and of course, we'll talk about audience in the next session, but if you understand where your audience is, of course, that's really critical. Pick the communication channels and the platforms that are most productive for you. Master those applications, leverage the best practices, leverage the analytics, use the information that you can to get the most out of them that you can. And then build organizational skill sets, versus being person dependent, which means maybe you have tools that your organization owns that helps optimize those channels. Maybe you take the time to document how you're using your channels so that, again, anyone who comes and sits in that seat will have a running start at how to best use them. This should be a part of your communication plan. Maybe you communicate certain things through social channels. Maybe you communicate certain things through print. Think about what those are. Oftentimes, it works best when the two are harmonized. When does that happen? So, what we're really saying here is if you're currently trying to manage, 6 different social identities and maybe 4 different regular email communications on top of what you're doing on your website, on top of maybe what you're doing through earned media and PR and even paid, That's a lot of things. So try to sit down and just think, is this working for me? Is it not? And where can I get really the best ROI on the investments I make and use them really, really well? To that point, measure everything and use the information to make decisions. Unsurprisingly, given how much emphasis that I just put on have a goal, we also should see, are we meeting that goal? And hence the measurement. So when we say measure everything, we mean, any metrics that you're able to have should be part of evaluating if your goal was met. Sometimes those are pretty soft numbers. Sometimes those can be really hard numbers. It depends on, again, the goal and, what tactic it is that you're trying to measure. But I know this, that you never can get where you're going if you don't know where you are. So sometimes when we work with organizations that don't have a strong practice or habit of measurement, there can be a lot of apprehension to do that for the first time. What's it going to say? Is it going to look like it's failing? Is it going to look like it's good? Well, who knows? All we know is where we are today. So you got to start and get that number. And then we can decide. We can decide if it's good or if it's bad or if it's just fine. Who knows? Because then you start to track what happens afterwards. If you have a database, and I hope you do, you want to track your audience information. If you have a comp plan, you should have a dashboard that complements it. The dashboard would list all the metrics that you want to use to see if things are performing well or not performing well, and then have a discipline of using it. The great thing about doing this is, one, as the headline says, it helps you make good decisions. If you're planning next year, you can look at this year and see what worked and what didn't, and make some really informed decisions. The more informed you are, you can also take some risks. Maybe there's things you've never invested in, and you can give it a shot because you think, all right, well, this trial where we sent postcards worked really well. Maybe we should send a series of 3 postcards and see if that works even better, to promote an event, for example. That's a total made up idea, but the thought is, if you have information from one tactic, you can think about how that might apply to deciding to make a bigger investment in something in the future that might have felt a little risky to make that investment in the past. Data can help you feel more confident about it. So define the metrics that matter most to you. And then the other piece to this, though, is make them visible. They are shared. This is the other thing I see sometimes when it comes to measuring, that the communications metrics feel like they're specifically tied to the job performance of the communications person. And to some degree, that's true. We're not going to, skirt that. But to some degree, just like we talked about content, the organization has some shared responsibility for the effectiveness of how the organization comes across to its audiences. So, so we really encourage that the more everyone's informed, the more everyone can help contribute as well. So it's better to know than to not, I think, is really the bottom line there. All right, so how does all this build momentum, and maybe what does that even mean? Well, we said at the beginning that what we're really talking about is trying to spark actions and meet goals. And there's a bit of a flywheel effect. The more you use communications as a tool to move your audiences and meet goals, the more that success begets success, the more that what you want to get done starts to get done. It becomes more efficient. It becomes more effective. You can reach further. You get more people. So what we really like to see is that when done effectively, communications will really productively drive actions that's in service to those goals. And we see it in audiences and what they do. They may pay more attention when they know that an email is going to have great content in it and it's something they're interested in. You'll see more clicks, you'll see more opens. When they understand you better, you might see them engage more. When they take the desired actions that you're trying to prompt, sign up, buy tickets, make a gift, you'll see more of those I use this lightly, sort of transactions take place. You might see them, your audience is starting to amplify your message. How much are they retweeting what you're putting out there? How much are they sharing your content? You'll grow their commitment. If you see that you have one part of your audience that's extremely loyal to one part of your program, perhaps you can expand their loyalty to other aspects of your program. That'd be a great group to target and have a really clear plan on what kind of growth you'd like to see within that audience. And then, of course, what we always want to see is loyalty year in and year out, especially when it comes to giving. That's very, very important. So all of those things build momentum. And again, that kind of gets that flywheel going where it's, it's real hard at first and each communication has to work really hard and we don't have all good data yet. And then ultimately get to a point where your data is sharp, your practices are clear, your goals are really crisp, and then you can start to see that things are working effectively. All right, so that's the communication side of the equation. And we did this as a two-part intentionally because that's what we do. Now we need to think about the audience, so we have our next part of the conversation to come up here in September that's about attracting and keeping key audiences. So I very much look forward to talking about that side of it in a few weeks. So let's see, I'll stop there. Katie, were there any questions along the way?
Yeah, thanks so much, Carrie. I know I was taking a lot of notes being part of the comms team here at the Ohio Arts Council, a lot of really valuable advice here. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll stay here. We still have a few more minutes left to field questions. I thought it was really interesting, the point that you made about the feedback loop. And I know sometimes we worry about survey fatigue and hitting people too many times, and it was an interesting concept of just the 3 questions. That could be such a simple way to and I thought it was interesting how more people actually engaged with that than you anticipated. So I think little things like that, mixing it up, are such a great, that was a great refresher of things that sometimes we forget. So thanks for sharing that part.
Yeah, the other part about that was cool was that that wasn't anonymous, obviously. Those people responded with an email, so we knew exactly who they were. So it was also a really big tip on who's interested in the organization in the program. So we were able to say, okay, well, that's a nice little target group that we have here that we can think about exploring, cultivating those relationships even further. So there was a couple of things that were fun about that.
That's fantastic. Great. Well, man, everyone is quiet today. I think you were super thorough in your presentation. If you have questions later, Carrie's contact information is there on the screen. I'll send it out in a follow-up email. Like I said, we have someone raising their hand. Harry, do you want to talk? Oh, wait, gotta unmute.
Hello.
Hi, Harry.
Yeah, I sent in a chat, but I guess it didn't work. My question is this. Are you talking about, when you talk about communication in today's presentation, are you talking mainly about written communication or verbal communication? It wasn't clear to me.
Oh, that's an important question. Thank you. There is no doubt most of what I was referencing is written, whether it be through print or digital channels. But it certainly would be inclusive of video content that's being documented and could be even audio content that could be distributed that way too. In terms of in-person communications, I really feel most of these would also apply, in the sense that, if you take really the high themes here, what we'd be referencing would be having clear intention, understand the audience you're talking to, and trying to get the most out of every opportunity. So I can see how there'd be application there, but this is very much from from working from a communications plan and using that breadth of tools for pushing out your communications. Does that help? I like that question though. It'll make me go back and look at this list and think about it from a, from what a one-on-one interaction might look like and how it would apply.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. People talk about having their elevator pitch, right? And making sure that everyone in the agency kind of understands the tone and the messaging that we want to get across. And I think that could definitely apply there. So
Absolutely. That would be the very first one. Know your core story and be able to use it anywhere, anywhere and anytime.
Thank you, Harry. Thanks for that question. Any other questions? Really encourage you to sign up for part 2. This has been fantastic, Carrie. I dropped the link to register for part 2. Again, that's September 15th, Thursday, 2 p.m. right back here, same place. So I encourage you to register and join us again. If there are no other questions, I will be sending around a recording of today's webinar by Monday at the latest. So stay tuned to your inboxes for that. We'll also include Carrie was nice enough to put together a really great resource. It's a handout with some tips from today's presentation that you can use as an additional resource down the road, which is really helpful. Thank you, Carrie. And I think that's it. I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to tune in today, and we hope to see you again next month. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a great day.